The Sisters of Silence, a faction as cool as they are, absolutely supplemental. I talk about that mainly in the tabletop sense, and I also say that very sadly. The Sisters of Silence I have a incredibly large soft spot for. I adore them so much. I think it's a very common sentiment. The Sisters of Silence are just all around really, really cool. Like, their entire visual style rules, the concept of them is sick. And I also say this as a large Custodes fan. And so when you tell me that there's a very, very cool faction that's just their main best friends, I'm immediately hooked as well. And I'm also going to break down a bit more when it comes to them, because I think their whole supplemental nature, I have a hot take about it. So stay tuned to the end, I guess.
Thank you to all my channel members for making these videos possible.
So who actually are the Sisters of Silence? Well, the Sisters of Silence are an elite military group that are based in Terra, and they're an elite group working for the Emperor himself, directly under him, who are made up entirely of blanks, specifically all blank women. Now, what are blanks? This is actually a really, really important concept in Warhammer 40k, and for those who aren't really familiar, I'm going to break it down. For those of you who are familiar, I'm going to break it down, actually. I think there's a lot of misconceptions on what a blank actually is. The term blank is a bit of a casual term for people who have what is known as the pariah gene present in their DNA. The pariah gene is literally a genetic piece of material inside of a person that can be passed down genetically, obviously, and is actually present in a fuck ton of species. It's not just us. And with this really, really rare mutation, it actually is this aura that you now have that shuts off anything psychic or warp-based. Around you, there's now just a blank place in real space that turns off any warp shenanigans, just completely. This is pretty ridiculous, obviously, but gets a little deeper than this, and isn't exactly the positive it sounds like. There's a bit of a misconception here, and I honestly think it's very fair, and it's a bit of my own theory here. People state very, very often that it's because blanks do not have souls. Now, this is actually something that the universe itself says is a theory that inquisitors and other scientists in Warhammer 40k have proposed, because obviously, everyone has a presence in the warp, the realm of just cognitive thought and souls, like everything. Therefore, a person who is essentially the reverse and just doesn't have a presence in the warp at all really implies that you don't have a soul in any regard, which is fair, and this is like a prevalent theory. But there are also some other points going around this, as a lot of other inquisitors have proposed that in reality, blanks are actually like a reverse psyker. Whatever a psyker is, they are just literally the inverse of that. And as well, they have a soul, just like a different form of one because of the pariah gene. But I ascribe a lot more to the idea that they are inverse psykers with some of I think it's a bit more interesting personally than the idea that you just don't have a soul. Therefore, whoa, suddenly it just doesn't work no more. Which, yeah, turning off the warp is pretty powerful, because turning off this means you're basically immune to psychic abilities. Because how psychic stuff works is people utilize warp energies, pull it into real space, and manipulate reality. Blanks are just immune to psychic shit, just completely. You try to cast a spell at them, it fizzles, just completely. And even worse, if a psyker is even next to a blank, it sucks. Which, there's a deeper reason for this. And this goes into the part where people say like, oh, it's because there's no soul. No, it actually is broken down in the Eisenhorn trilogy, and I think it's really cool. In reality, what blanks are doing when they're next to people is because they're shutting down the like neural synapse, like just energy in between your brain. There's just normal reactions going on in your synapses, like just up there. And it's in that part that for psychics is very prevalent for casting your abilities. And that's the part where the warp energy kind of accumulates and is casted from. So turning that off, it isn't lethal in any way, but it sucks. For a psyker, oh my god, it sucks. For a regular person, essentially you just feel really uncomfortable because a part of your brain non-lethally just kind of turning off, not great. Around normal people, blanks are treated very poorly because you feel really uncomfortable, or if it's really way too long of like contact, you get a little aggressive. That's honestly pretty common for blanks to be killed as children by their parents. Just like you see your baby, and for some reason your baby is wrong, makes you really deeply uncomfortable. And then after a little bit, God, that baby pisses me off. And it's usually up to the Imperium to find them and track them down. But a lot of blanks are not found and live a isolated life, just not knowing why people hate them. But to a psyker, a large chunk of your brain is turned off, and that psychic energy gone hurts. It's the worst pain imaginable. So much that you just would rather do anything else. And that's just for, I guess, a moderately trained blank, because you can train the pariah gene in that blank effect, or even have tech to amplify its effect too. To a higher extent, being around a properly equipped and trained like blank, ripping out your own throat or your own eyes just to kill yourself on the spot is preferable to being next to them as a psyker. Which, yeah, that's a lot of breakdown. But once one of these blanks is actually found, they are taken to the Silent Sisterhood, which they are trained in the intensive arts of just the Silent Sisterhood. They become a badass. Which, yeah, they're so sick in all of the equipment they use and combat training, because they have to serve with a lot of heavy hitters and serving under the Emperor himself and another one of his personal fighting forces. And so you undergo your training and your recruitment until eventually you can go far enough to swear your oath, which is where we get the term the Silent Sisterhood or the Sisters of Silence. Because the moment you can become a true sister is the moment you can take your vow of silence. You're gonna hear the word silence a lot, largely because they literally take that vow to never speak again. You are then mute from that point forward. If you speak, consequences. You're breaking your oath like that, it's fucked up. And to get around some of the issues of, just being an entirely mute faction, they now have a new form of just sign language to communicate. Something that was actually shown off in the Warhammer Plus short, Tides, that dropped out like kind of recently. They have two forms of this. There's thought form and battle form. Thought form is like literally, based on what we saw with the short, is just British sign language. It would, changed out a bit since they can't use their mouths, and you have to change up some signs because some parts don't translate. I'm pulling this from people who actually know sign language and have talked about it on social media, so thank you guys. That's actually really cool information. I appreciate that. And then there's battle form, which battle form is a lot bigger motions and a lot more, I guess, exaggerated, because thought form is built to tell really complicated or philosophical ideas, like have conversations with people, especially have conversations in like quicker forms. Meanwhile, battle form is literally to communicate in battle. It is quick. You are saying the very simple ideas: go here, do this, kill that guy, shoot him in the face, psychic that way, easy stuff. And also you got to tell that from a distance, so you got to wave your hands wider so the person, like, I don't know, like 100 feet away can tell more what you're doing. So what do they actually do in the Imperium? Like, what's their job? Well, like I've been saying, they work underneath like the Emperor himself, one of his standing armies, much like the Custodes, who they work with kind of often, making the towns of the Emperor. They also, obviously, as I've kind of been laying out here, they deal with psychic phenomena, rogue psykers, and demons. They are the best equipped to go kill them, because who else do you send to go deal with a psyker? You got an untrained psyker on this hive world. They're starting to get a little explodey, because an untrained psyker is very, very dangerous. They're just a giant beacon in the warp, where a demon can be like, oh, is that a light? I'm gonna go get in there. Then they blow up your head and make a little portal in your brain. Poof, now they can get into real space and start murdering people. What better to deal with that than a person that just turns it off by being next to you? They're the best. Also, what better to deal with demons? Because demons hate the Sisters of Silence. Like, oh my god. They hate blanks in general. They're actually terrified of them, because what better than these people who just turn off the warp and can actually unbind them and send them packing right back to the warp, which they also serve with a lot of other like factions. You'll see this often if you read some of the books, which in the books you'll often find a Sister of Silence like serving in other armies, like helping them out with either the Space Marines, the Custodes, because a lot of times these factions don't have good psychic defense, and having a couple sisters in your squad, oh my god, it helps, especially if you're playing Custodes, because in tabletop terms, Custodes are great. They can deal with a lot. Try to shoot them, probably going to shrug it off, especially bolter fire or las guns. Good luck. But you cast smite on them. Yeah, man. Me playing into Grey Knights is a nightmare. However, you toss some sisters in there, now you got actual defenses. It's great. They're also very strongly linked with the Astra Telepathica, who they actually used to be part of until the Emperor saw this and was like, gimme, and just stole. He stole them and now they're his army. And of course, there's the second main role that they have, a really, really big one, linked to the Astra Telepathica. These are the black ships, not to be confused with an Inquisition black ship, which is a different thing, that they share the same name. Thanks, Games Workshop, for keeping it coherent. These ships are built to go deal with psykers, strictly in the tithe of psykers that the Imperial planets must face. They go around and they gather up a fuck ton of psykers all around. What is the scope of the black ship, like, squadron that's in the universe? Unknown. Only the Astra Telepathica knows. They're not telling anybody. The Inquisition isn't very happy at this secrecy. And they have a fuck ton of Sisters of Silence on board as part of the crew because, again, they're just that useful. They go down, they collect the tithe of psykers collected, and they bring them directly to the Scholastica Psychana, where they test if this psychic is actually worth something. To where then the psyker, if they turn out to be actually cool and control their powers or even strong, will then go send out to whatever faction is needed. Maybe they'll become an Inquisitor, maybe a battle psyker. If they're young enough, like a child who happens to be a psyker, you'll become like a Space Marine librarian, maybe even a Grey Knight. This is where a lot of that gets sent out, same way as like the Schola Progeniums. It's kind of the same thing, but psychic. But what happens to those who don't make the cut? Well, they're sent out to Terra, and they're fed to the Golden Throne, because the Emperor needs some tasty, tasty psychic souls to stay alive on his good old life support. This is where you get the whole thing of like the black ships actually feeding the Emperor. There's a step in between that people miss. It's very important. There's a step. And of course, I think there's other little tidbits that can be talked about, like all their war gear, more of their recruitment, like there's random little bits. But you know, the sisters don't have like the most expansive lore. There is a common thing I do want to talk about and address, which is the fact that people like to talk about the fact that Sisters of Silence deserve more lore, which I do agree with. I really agree with the fact that every single faction that isn't like Space Marines, yeah, like the top dogs, really, like all the other factions that are a little like underappreciated, need more lore, need more books. I'm a big fan of that because I just want more things expanded. I want more books. I want more fun stories. The fun of 40k is the fact that I think you can tell a lot of different stories inside of this, utilizing the framework that's been built up over a long just time that this entire setting has been alive. But the Sisters of Silence, I think, are in a really interesting position that I don't think a lot of people realize. Now, I have 2 points I'm going to make for this. One a bit more centered in reality. The other one, wild, rampant speculation based on my own personal opinion and takeaways. The one based in reality. So, I think people need to realize that the Sisters of Silence are actually a very new faction in Warhammer, like, respective to the lore. They were actually introduced in, like, 2007, which, to every other faction, is pretty recent. So, as such, they don't have a lot there because they just haven't been around for a long time. And then they had a lot of other things that they're working on, so they kind of got shafted, like, right in the middle, just, like, tossed away, which is part of the lore, actually. They got introduced in the Horus Heresy, then just forgotten and hated, because also blanks aren't liked, to only be brought back inside of the reforms Guilliman made when he allowed the Custodes to go outside of Terra. He brought back the Sisters of Silence in full force. That is part of, like, their lore, to explain the fact that they did nothing with them for so long. Which, yeah, I think it's an acknowledgement that they ignored them. And I also think that it's important to really understand that in the publishing business for games, books, and whatever, they are operating on a different time scale. That happened like just a good few years ago, like whole in relative publishing time. The revival of Guilliman and that storyline I just literally just talked about with the reformation of the Custodes and Sisters of Silence didn't happen that long ago. And when you go to like publishing stuff, they literally have everything mapped out and worked out like years in advance. Like the craziest I've heard is like 3-4 years in advance for publishing. They know exactly what everything is. So as people are clamoring, like saying, we want this, we need this now, they're literally looking at like a whiteboard that it says like in 2 years we are publishing this book. And it is the fact that I believe, and I say this as someone who adores this faction, I adore them so much. Please do not get that misunderstood at all with what I'm gonna say, because it sounds critical. I know, oh boy. I believe that in their current iteration of the lore, the Sisters of Silence are probably the best group of side characters ever. And if we want more of them, we are going to probably have to expect a bit of some changes, mainly an expansion of the faction. Something that would actually open up the Sisters to having a full codex. Because right now, I hear people calling for that. Like, let's get a Sisters of Silence codex. And it's like, with what information, man? We have like, I think, just like a handful of units. And quite honestly, what else do you want to put in there? There's only so many ideas that we can do right now with what is actually available in Sisters of Silence lore. And right now, with like the actual narrative device like they are used as, they are mainly used as like side characters. We have books where they take place in there, and like The Flight of the Eisenstein, they're in a genuinely good short story where they're actually the protagonists in like the first Horus Heresy short story collection, which is like the one exception. There's the Watchers of the Throne, where it's Valerian and Leia, which is mid as fuck, I'm not gonna lie. That book is boring. And a couple other stories where they just appear. They're characters, but they're not like the main. And I think it's kind of because, like, what other stories can you tell with them? In the short story with like the Horus Heresy collection, it's a story of them investigating psychic phenomena and like going to go investigate some warped psychic bullshit. Okay, cool. You can only tell that story like a couple times before it becomes the same thing. Oh man, they're gonna go take down a chaos sorcerer? Okay. Oh man, they're gonna go collect some psykers? Okay. It's just kind of that rinse and repeat. They're just not open enough as a faction to go do that. I cannot see in their current iteration the Sisters of Silence being like, come on gang, we have to go deal with the Necrons. Like, why would they do that? The Necrons ain't psychic, but I think if you're gonna have a group like that in a war game, the first thing you gotta do is have the lore open for them to fight every faction in the war game. Right now, they can only really fight the psychic ones. I can see them fighting Eldar, but like, what else? I don't know. But like, that's really my take, is I think that right now the Sisters of Silence are stuck, and there's not a lot of meat to it for people to cover and tell interesting stories right now. They're really, really good and interesting to put into stuff, but not as like the focal point. Or if we got Sisters of Silence, like real chunky stories, we'd get like one or two. So yeah, I don't know. I would like to see more. I want to see them expanded. I want to see more stuff, because the idea in the future that we can get a like actual Sisters of Silence army in the same way as like I can field like Custodes, the same way I can field like actual Sisters of Battle. I want something like that, genuinely, fully, unironically. But I think they would have to do something. Or I'm talking completely out my ass, and in a couple years, like I said, with publishing dates, I'm gonna be proven wrong, which I would love that. I would love to be proven wrong here, please. Yeah, that is gonna wrap it up. So if you like this, like, comment, subscribe, do that stuff, join my membership, and see ya.